Alright children, we are back with videos. So this is Friday's video for 320 word trig. Alright, this is 6.3, alternate trig definition 2. So just a reminder, your alternate trig definition 1 was the triangle, SOHCAHTOA, sine, opposite over hypotenuse, etc. Okay? Even though this is technically alternate definition 2, it's pretty much the same as 1, but since we're on an XY coordinate system now, we're calling it something different, but it's actually going to be pretty much the same. You'll see. Alright, so take an angle theta, put it in standard position. Let me work that out. How about that? Pick any point on the terminal side x, y, and let r be the distance from the vertex to x, y. So I have my XY coordinate system, okay? Not necessarily on a unit circle, okay? We'll talk about that in a minute. But if you take an angle, okay, here's my standard position, starting at the origin to the right of, on the right side of the x-axis, and then the terminal side is where the angle ends, so the initial side is where it starts, the terminal side is where it ends. It said pick any point on the terminal side. So if I pick this point, okay, any point on the terminal side, x, y. Okay, that's the point x, y. And let r be the distance from the vertex to the point. So this is your r. Or, as you can call it, radius if we were on a circle. Okay, so that distance from the origin to the point that you picked. Okay, that's the distance r. That's the point x, y. So when you get that, you actually have built a triangle. So, okay, if I wanted to get to this point right here, just from my xy axis, I would go to the left x units, and I would go up y units. So that's my point x, y. Okay. So I was going to write something down and I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, you build triangle always against x-axis. Okay, so your radius comes out, if you want to call it, your radius comes out from the origin, and you build your triangle against the x-axis. So your triangle shouldn't be built up here against the y-axis. It's always against the x-axis. Okay. Alright, so then you have the coordinate point x, y. Okay. So you can build the angle in any of these quadrants. Having said that, given all that information, our new trig definitions are, according to this xy coordinate system, an angle sine of theta, so this is your angle theta, will be equal to y, sine always goes with y, over the r, over that r distance. Okay. Cosine of theta is the x distance over the r distance. Okay. Tangent, still sine over cosine, so if it's still sine over cosine of theta, then it's gonna be y over r over x over r multiplied by the slope. It's still gonna be y over x. So nothing has changed there. And then cosecant, just again flip sign, r over y, secant, r over x, and cotangent, flip it, x over y. So you might be thinking, Sam, it's the same as our triangle, because that's technically, when you build a triangle, that's your hypotenuse. So yes, that's why I said, even though it's a different definition because of what we're given on this coordinate system, if you look at it, we have a right triangle. Y, okay, over opposite, and then go from there with the angles and all that stuff. It's a little bit more deeper than that, because technically this is your angle inside of here, but I'm not getting an explanation of why it all works. That it all works. So when we do this math, I'm gonna usually, even though these are the definitions, refer to it as opposite and hypotenuse, all that. It's just easier. Just the FYI, if you look at other people's videos for this, they don't necessarily build it on an XY coordinate system. Maybe you were taught to just build the triangle. To me, it's easier to build it on the XY coordinate system in terms of signs, so you know what your signs are. Okay, so just a little heads up. All right, and just FYI, if you were to pick, it said pick any point on the terminal side. So if you were to pick this point to be R, then your R would be different, right? That would be different. Your XY would be different. So we can build all kinds of different size triangles on this XY coordinate system, but your definitions still stay the same. If R was equal to 1, then we'd be on the unit circle. Okay, so we don't necessarily have to be on the unit circle to use these definitions. Alright, so let's do an example with all that information. Alright. Example. The terminal side of an angle, we'll call it alpha, passes through 4, -5. Find all 6 trig functions of alpha. Okay, so we gotta build the angle or draw the angle. Okay, that's what we gotta do. And again, I'm gonna build it on the XY coordinate system. Alright, so it says that the terminal side of an angle alpha goes through 4, 5. So here's your initial side, and then it goes through 4, 5. So go over to the right 4 and down 5. There's 4, 5. So there's your angle, okay? And you always build your triangle against the x-axis. Always. So here's alpha. Okay? And you might be thinking, well, Sam, when you went around the circle, you built the angle, so isn't that big guy the angle, not this little one? I'm not going to get into all that. The little guy is the angle. It all works out, so that is our angle. It's built with the terminal side and against the x-axis. Okay? If you want further explanation, ask me. If not, just trust me. Alright, so I built my triangle, and we know that this x distance is 4, and we know that this y distance is 5. But it's negative because we went down. So even though we're on a triangle and you usually don't have negative lengths, since we're on the XY coordinate system, I warned you of this, you have to have the correct signs. So that is a -5. And it says it wants us to find all 6 trig functions of alpha. So what it wants us to find, sine of alpha, cosine of alpha, etc. Okay, it wants us to find all 6 of them. So what do we got to do first? Find the hypotenuse. Find R, or I'm going to start calling it the hypotenuse. Okay. So how do we find that? Pythagorean theorem. Okay, so you want to complete your triangle first. So we got A and B and C. So 4 squared plus -5 squared equals C squared. Make sure you have your correct math with parentheses. 16 plus 25 equals C squared. and then c squared equals the square root of 41, plus or minus, let me just do c, I did it all, plus or minus, don't forget when you square root both sides, but your hypotenuse, I told you this in one of the other videos, is always positive. Hypotenuse is always positive. Alright, so it is the square root of 41. Now that we have our triangle built, we can get our 6 trig functions. Okay? So sine, cosine, tangent of alpha, and then cosecant of alpha, secant of alpha, and cotangent of alpha. Alright. So here we go. Sine of alpha. That is opposite, so here's my alpha, opposite over hypotenuse, or y over r. Okay, so however you want to think it, y over r, or opposite over hypotenuse, I'm okay with either one. It's negative 5 over square root of 41. Okay, so remember, if this is my alpha, this is the opposite side, and this is the adjacent side. And remember, across from the right angle is always your hypotenuse. So you can see it either way. With the definition number 1, definition number 2, I'm okay with either one. They both work. Alright. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. Cosecant is, what am I at? Cosecant, just flip this guy upside down. Square root of 41 over negative 5. Secant, square root of 41 over 4. And square and 4 over negative 5. So we got to build these angles, build these triangles, and find our trig functions. Now they're going to get more complicated, figuring out where this angle lives. But once you get there, the rest is old math that you know how to do. Okay. And remember, even though we're not on the unit, this is not the unit circle. Look, the square root of 41, that radius is like, what, 6 point something? Okay, that's not the unit circle. However, your sine and cosine are still less than 1. So no matter if you're on the unit circle or not, by definition, your sine and cosine are still less than 1. Okay, so that still holds true. Okay, we could make this go on the unit circle. Again, that's extra information I don't need to tell you right now, or at all, unless you really want to go deeper in this. Okay. Alright, let's do another example. So now we're going to do the same thing, but the question's going to be worded a little bit differently, and you got to think a little bit more. Okay. Fine, here's an example. Find all 6 trig ratios. Ratio means fraction, so all the trig functions, all the ratios of theta, if sine of theta equals negative 4/5 and cosine of theta is negative. Okay. So in the last example, they told us that the terminal point went through 4, negative 5. So we knew exactly what quadrant we were in. Go over 4, go down 5. This is not telling us that point. This is telling us some information to figure out what quadrant theta lives in. Okay. So which quadrant does theta live in? Okay. And we're going to use this information. Okay. Alright, so this is one of the harder part. Okay, once you get this, the rest of it is generally pretty easy. It's old math. Trying to figure out where theta lives. Okay. Alright, XY coordinate system, and let's talk about this. So sine of theta is negative 4/5. Now that negative, okay, that means sine's negative, it means the y is negative. So which quadrant is y negative? That's quadrant, yes, 3 and 4. So I'm going to put a little theta here and a little theta here because that's quadrant 3 and 4. Okay, so theta could be either one of these because that's where sine is negative. Alright, I'm going to do a different color for my other piece of information. Cosine of theta is negative. Okay, so cosine is what? The x value. So x is negative in quadrants, which one, guys? Yes, 2 and 3. This is where your x value is negative. Okay, so which two quadrants do they both agree at to satisfy both of these, this piece of information about theta? So the only way that these two pieces of information can be true for theta is in quadrant 3. That's where they both satisfy that information. So theta has to live in 3. So that's how you're going to find where your angle lives. It's only one of those quadrants, and you're going to narrow it down with the information given. Again, sine is the y value. So y is negative in 3 and 4. Cosine is the x value. X is negative in 2 and 3. So that's where they both agree. That's where they both can satisfy theta. So it's quadrant 3. Alright. So I'm going to draw it on a new triangle though. So all that information. Alright, so I'm going to draw my angle. And remember, theta is always built, or your angle is always built against the x-axis. Always, always, always. Otherwise your trig ratios won't work correctly. So there's your theta. Excuse me. So your radius or hypotenuse comes out. Your angle is always built against the x-axis. Alright. Now we got some information to fill in. Okay. We want to find all the trig functions of theta. So sine of theta, cosine of theta, all that stuff. So it tells us that sine of theta equals negative 4/5. So that is telling us what, guys? That's telling us the opposite side over the hypotenuse. So here's my theta. This is opposite of theta. This is adjacent of theta. This is always my hypotenuse. So the opposite side is 4. The hypotenuse is 5. And I always said the hypotenuse is positive. Sine is negative, so we know this value has to be negative, the y value. Okay, so you got to label it correctly with your signs as well. Alright. We still have to find the other trig function, so we still need that other side. How do we find that other side? Yes, Pythagorean theorem. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so find x. Pythagorean theorem. Alright, so I have negative 4 squared plus b squared, right? Because that's the x value, it's the other leg, equals 5 squared. So b squared equals 25 minus 16 is 9. b equals plus or minus the square root of 9, right? When you square root both sides, b equals plus or minus, simplify that. You always have to simplify. Even if it's partially simplifying your root, you have to simplify your roots. b plus or minus square root of 3. And what is it? Is it plus? Is it minus? Is it both? Well, it's 3. Let's see. Okay. You're in the third quadrant, and they already said cosine is negative. And if you look, you're going to the left. X is negative. So it's got to be negative 3. That's how you label it. Negative 3. Okay. Alright, so be careful, watch your signs. So now that our triangle is complete, we can find all our trig functions. So here we go. Okay. Sine of theta, they already told us, equals negative 4/5. Cosine of theta, and this is a famous 3, 4, 5 triangle. So if you know that by heart, and you don't do the Pythagorean theorem because you know it's 3, 4, 5, it's fine with me. You just got to have your signs right. Okay? cosine of theta, adjacent over hypotenuse, tangent of theta. Remember, you always plug in an angle. Whether you know the angle or not, it should be either a symbol for that angle or the actual number for that angle if you know it. Tangent is opposite over adjacent, -4 over -3, which is 4 over 3, simplified completely. And then flip all these guys for the other trig functions. So cosecant of theta equals -5 over 4, secant of theta equals 5 over -3, doesn't matter where the negative goes, and cotangent of theta, 3 over 4. Alright, there you go. So again, once you got your triangle built in the right quadrant, the rest of the math isn't bad. You know how to do the rest of the math. And just a warning, we're going to be applying this for the next few days, maybe a week. We're going to have to do this math, but then go a little bit further. We're going to learn some other formulas that we're going to use. So you want to get this math down because we're going to be building a lot of angles or triangles for the next few days or a week or so. Okay, so that's the hardest part of figuring out where theta lives, and that's all according to the information that they give you. Okay, sine is negative in these quadrants, cosine is negative in these two quadrants, the x value, so it's quadrant 3. Alright, let's do another one. Example. Find all 6 trig ratios if tangent, find all 6 trig ratios if tangent of alpha equals, this isn't right. Oh yeah, we're good. Tangent of alpha equals -3/4, and sine of alpha is less than 0. Actually, I'm going to change that. I'm going to change it. I knew I was going to change it, darn it. Alright. I think you can find all the 6 trig ratios. Okay, let me just start on the whole thing together. Stop right now. Damn, is that whiteout's jacked up? Alright. Determine where each angle terminates. So I'm just going to have you practice building those. Like, what quadrant is it in? Okay, here's A. Because you can get the trig functions. Like, you can totally get them all. That's not the hard part. The hard part is building them, figuring out where they live. Tangent of alpha equals -3/4, and sine of alpha is less than 0. Okay. So we're going to go on the xy coordinate system, and we're going to figure out this information that's given. Tangent is negative in which quadrant? So where is tangent negative? In quadrants. Well, here it's positive, so tangent is x over y, or sorry, y over x. So it's got to be a y negative, or it's got to be an x negative. Okay, that's what we're looking for. Positive, negative, negative. So tangent's got to be negative in 2 or 4. Okay, that's a possibility. I didn't mean alpha or theta, I meant alpha. Alright. That means we got to use the other piece of information to narrow it down. Sine of alpha is less than 0. What's less than 0 mean? That's where y is negative. So y is negative in quadrants. Where's y negative? 3 and 4. Alright, so if you look, the only quadrant that they both satisfy these conditions is quadrant 4. So alpha lives in quadrant 4. So I'm just going to write this down over here. You would build it out like this. And that's janky, man. That is janky. Alright. And just for practice sake, tangent is opposite over adjacent. Okay. And look at tangent is negative. So which one of these is negative? The y. Okay. So that's how you would build it. Alright, B. Sine of beta equals 2/3, and this is one of the harder ones to do. Beta lives between pi over 2 and 3 pi over 2. Yeah, so that one's tougher to do. So let's talk about this. Okay. So let's get some information down. It says sine of beta is 2/3, so that's y is positive. Okay, your y value is positive. And which quadrants? In quadrants, yes, 1 and 2, y is positive. Okay, that's the first piece of information. And the second piece of information says beta lives between 3 pi over 2, or pi over 2 and 3 pi over 2. Okay, so this is where you start. Okay, and you go counterclockwise, right around the unit circle, and this is where you end. Okay, so here's pi over 2, here's 3 pi over 2, okay, and then you start here, you start at the smallest value and go around. So it's saying beta lives between these two. Okay, that's what it's saying. That's how you interpret that. Smallest, largest. So that's where you start, draw your angle, go around. Okay, so it's quadrants 2 and 3. Okay, so that's quadrant 2 and 3. 2 or 3. Okay. So where do they both get satisfied at though? Beta is in quadrant 2. Okay. That's where they're both satisfying that. And again, if you were to draw this, you would draw it, terrible, against the x-axis. Sine is 2 over 3, so here's your beta. Opposite is 2, hypotenuse is 3, and then you would go from there. Sine is positive, your hypotenuse is always positive. If you found your x, it would be negative. Take a look at that, let it sink in. Alright, last but not least, C, just for good measure. Sine of x, whatever, sine of x equals negative 5 over 13, and secant of x is greater than 0. Okay, alright, so we're going to interpret this information again. Sine of x is equal to negative 5/13, so that's y is negative. Remember, your sine value is your sine value is y. Y is negative in quadrants. What is it? Where is sine y negative? Yes, 3 and 4. Okay, there's that piece of information. And then the other piece of information, secant of x is greater than 0. Well, secant is 1 over cosine of x, and that's 1 over the x value. Don't get freaked out about it, it's just a variable. That could be alpha, beta, theta, whatever. So x is positive I don't care whether the x is on top or bottom. If secant is positive, that's because cosine is positive. Okay? X is positive in quadrants 1 and 4. So that means X lives in quadrant 4. Okay, that's where they both are satisfied. Okay. Alright, let's build that guy for practice sake. It's always against the x-axis. And it says sec sine of x is negative 5 over 13. So sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Sine's negative, this y value is negative. Okay. And what if I asked you to find, from that information, cotangent of x? You go ahead and do that on your own, and I can end this video. That means you got to complete the triangle, and then just go find the cotangent value. Okay. You can take a peek at the lower right hand corner when you're done, and you can check it. I won't say it out loud of what the answer is. Don't cheat. Alright, that is done for now.